Hello.
Continue.
We're talking once again about Poland, but this time we're not talking about Cossacks. We're talking about their polar opposites, the Jewish people who live in Poland, or lived in Poland. They're not very many left anymore. We'll talk about that later. Well, there's a fundamental misunderstanding, and this is sort of stereotype of the anti-Semitic Pole. That kind of exists, and it kind of doesn't, and we'll get to that. But in reality, it's actually been one of the best places where Jews actually lived in the Middle Ages, particularly in the Middle Ages, but also in Europe in general. So, why is this? And it all starts with a fellow called Bolesław the Pious, who I'm not going to draw for you because I don't know what he looks like. I don't remember what he looks like. But basically, the long and short of it is that he was under the impression that he granted religious freedom to the Jews in Poland and said, you can practice, and he has a series of like 15 points, which were basically just an outline of what was and wasn't Jewish liberties, and it was a charter. Anyways, so now we go on to a fellow called Casimir the Great. He's the more important of the two. And I do know what he looks like, so I will draw him.
Is this the guy you drew last week again?
No, that's a different person. That was Peter the Great of Russia.
This is, okay, yeah.
There was kings, but at different places.
Fabulous beard.
This is roughly what he looks like, I swear.
He looks like a squid.
He does. That is Casimir the Great of Poland. So, first of all, midway through his, first of all, he at this time, he was in the 1300s, late 1300s. And so at the time of his life, basically there was a series of massive pogroms in the Rhineland, which, if this is Poland, if this is kind of Poland at the time, then the Rhineland is kind of that way. It's pretty far away. It's like on the border with France and Germany. It's that way. And he invited
Rhineland. I like Riceland better. That's all right.
I can, but I just have
whatever. Continue.
Anyways, so basically, he began encouraging Jewish immigration for the purpose of, and he basically wanted to strengthen the Polish economy because he was kind of a little
Polish.
Yes, but not exactly. It wasn't racism necessarily, and we'll get to why. So he begins inviting a lot of Jews to come, and then he has a thing. He writes he creates a charter called the Statute of Kalisz, which I will write on the board for you, and I do want to spell that. Statute of there we go. That's an S, by the way. So the Statute of Kalisz is a reinstatement of Bolesław the Pious's liberties, and with a few more expansions of things like, for instance, if you're a Christian and you desecrate a Jewish cemetery, your hands are sliced off, or things like that. It's medieval, okay? It's normal.
Wait, if you're Jewish and you disintegrated a... What?
If you desecrate a Jewish cemetery and you're a Christian, your hands are sliced
Wait!
off.
What about if you did that and you were Jewish?
Your hands would still be chopped off, and you probably die, but, you know. But basically, so at this time he's also doing a thing where he is trying to expand Poland. Poland has been split up into several different principalities, and he is the main one. And so he starts invading Halych, which we talked about in our Cossacks episode.
Mm-hmm.
And he takes over Halych and kicks out all the boyars, who are not terribly happy but can't do anything. So, what
peasantry.
begins to happen is that all of the nobles start getting estates in Halych, but they have no one to manage them, and this is something that emerges later. So, basically, what they do is they are absentee landlords, and they just say, so basically, Jews at the time didn't drink at all. I mean, they only on holidays, and so basically, what they would do is they would say, you are going to manage the finances and collect taxes on this land, and in return, you'll basically be the lord for, like, your lifetime, basically, because they were leaseholding, and so it's a different type of lease. It's not like a 5-year lease; it's like a lifelong lease, and it's also hereditary. So your children also get to be lords, which is one of the reasons why my family, who lived in Mir, had been leaseholders on a mill there for like 200 years, something like that. It was crazy. Basically, so that starts happening, but at this point in Polish history, the Jews are mainly limited to cities and are deeply connected to the crown because of Casimir being king. And this also reflects a change in Polish society that comes later with the crown and the nobles being to shift power. So basically, Casimir at some point started having an affair with a Jewish woman called Esterka. He doesn't actually have any legitimate children. We don't really know why, but he has like 5 children off of her who are all bastards. Because of this, I may be related to him. I say I may, but that said, most of the Jews in Poland are supposed to be like 8 cousins, so that said, all of us, statistically speaking, are related to him, so it doesn't really matter. Anyways, we're going to jump ahead a bit to the 16th century, and I'll explain why. So, in the 16th century, there's a distinctive change in Polish society in which the nobles begin to gain more power, and the king slowly becomes more and more sort of diminished in his standing. And although he's still the king, he doesn't have as much power, and he's now elected at this point. And what's beginning to happen is that fewer and fewer Jews are connected to the crown, and more of them are noblemen, basically. Not noblemen, they don't have titles. And so one thing that you can use as an indicator of how good it was for them there in some ways is you can look at how many of them were ennobled. And this is interesting because it depends on how you define ennoblement. So Polish nobles are weird because they don't ennoble very many people ever. Over the course of 200 years in the 16th century and the 17th century, only 28 families were ennobled ever. That's not very many compared to things like Austria and the German principalities. And the reason being that the nobles were kind of racist and wanted to stay as noble as possible and believed that they were above everyone, including foreign nobles. And so basically they would not ennoble anyone unless they did something incredibly special. That said, Jews were knighted a lot. And when I say knighted, I don't mean like battle knights, like guys in armor. I mean like, you did this thing for me and you're awesome, so I'm going to knight you and give you an honorary title. It's not hereditary. It doesn't actually make you a noble kind of knight. In the same way that, John Lennon is a knight. So there is only one Jewish nobleman in the history of Poland, and it's him and his brother, and his name was Michael. I think it was Michael Ezefovich. That's his name, I think. And he was granted the Leleva coat of arms, so it's also weird because they don't have multiple coats. You don't get a unique coat of arms. You share your coat of arms with like 50 different families. It's weird. So he was sharing it with a much more powerful family called the Tarnowskis. And yeah, so he is the only one. And the Leleva coat of arms is really weird. It's like a star and a crescent moon, a 6-pointed star, a crescent moon, and a hat with some peacock feathers. Not a hat, a helmet with peacock feathers on top. So what is getting a little bizarre is the fact, and something that is remarked on consistently is, first of all, unlike Germany, you don't have people wearing badges, and that was not a Nazi thing. That was made up in France in the 1200s. I'm not kidding. And so actually, in most places in the world, Jews are wearing what's called the circle badge, and it's a badge in the form of a wheel, which we generally interpret to mean this. And it's yellow, and you wear it on the front of your jacket here or here.
Wait, show again where?
Here or here. But in Poland, this doesn't exist, which is remarked on consistently by bishops who go there from Rome, because it's Catholic and, you're inviting people in. So the bishops who go there from Rome are constantly remarking on the fact that it's kind of weird because, the Pope doesn't like the Jews at all, and the Polish are really, really devout, but, the burghers and nobles in Poland really don't seem to mind the Jews at all and tend to actually be kind of friendly, which is weird, at least to them. It's not that weird today, but that said, the peasants are not terribly big on the Jews because, tax collecting. No one likes tax collectors. And that's where the Cossacks come in later and start massacring people, although they also killed a lot of Poles, and yeah, basically. So what's interesting is that despite the fact that we have reports that romances took place between burgher families and Jewish families, we don't actually, genetically speaking, have very much admixture, which is interesting because they've been living there for literally 1,000 years, and that's pretty fascinating. That said, there is some, but it's actually not from Poland, and I can talk about that some other time. But what that indicates is that despite the fact that they were very much sort of accepted, they were also very separate. And this goes back to an idea that was made up by Sigismund II, which is the Council of Four Lands, which is basically an independent government that just deals with sort of matters of Jewish law. And so they have their own court system and their own counselors, and they don't have nobles except for that one guy who got a noble and a bunch of knights who are boring and are tax collector knights. And so it's very interesting. And what really begins to happen is that they actually become looser and looser as time goes on, and they cease to be loose when Russia takes over in the 1790s. And we know this, and this is something I have memorized, but not perfectly, and you can look it up if you want. So one way to measure the looseness of a culture is so when a culture is constantly oppressed, it tends to become very religious or spiritual and sort of insular. But because they had been unoppressed, and I say unoppressed, they were not necessarily well liked by everyone, but they were well liked enough by some to be, and they were protected by the nobles, so they were not oppressed in the same way. So what happened was that the sort of culture grew looser and looser. So, for instance, Jews stopped following the orders of the council, which basically said you can't wear really, really rich fabrics and no velvet. They started dressing up like nobles because they felt like nobles and basically were because they were landlords. And so what you see start happening is that the nobles are starting to actually get kind of pissed off because you have a bunch of people running around dressed like them with the medallions and coats of arms on them that they don't have. And it's a little weird. And so one thing that happens is that Sigismund III becomes annoyed and actually passes a law that says you can't wear gold medallions if you're Jewish. It's not followed because the nobles like the Jews enough because they need them on their estates that they just say, don't worry about it, I'll protect you. And so basically it starts to become this really weird thing where some people really don't like them. Like some people really hate them and some people really like them. And it's very...
There is no in between.
Exactly. It's very strange. Kind of like American politics. And so what's very interesting about this little thing is that it didn't really happen anywhere else until much later. And so what's even more interesting is that within the community of Jews in Poland, which had grown significantly at this point, there's this weird sort of a schism between really, really devout people and people who are really devout but don't follow all the rules. And so you read an account from the from like the 1660s, I think, of a rabbi who was very, very devout. And this is before Jews dressed all in black, so he's probably wearing like grays, I think. It's hard to know. We know for a fact from descriptions of people who've been murdered or had, killed someone or had died, and we know from inventories of their houses that Jews had a lot of reds and blues in their closets, but not necessarily rich fabrics if you were devout. As I said, it's forbidden by the Council of Four Lands, which not everyone followed, and we'll get into that. Basically, he talks about an old friend from childhood who went away to the capital and has returned to his childhood village. And he says that he didn't recognize him because, first of all, he'd shaved his beard off, which was not supposed to be done, but he did it anyways. And we know that this is actually pretty common because there's actually a thing where they have, it's a book that they use to educate, young nobles, like tutors, and it's the social classes of non-noble commoners and burghers. And there is a Jewish leaseholder, and he does not have a beard in the picture. The only way we know is that he's wearing a neck ruff, and no one else is, because that's a thing that survived in that sort of echelon of society. And so what's really interesting is that, the rabbi goes up to him and he's like, who are you? And he sort of knows him, he looks him right in the face, and he says that he's wearing a German-style coat and a wig and a cravat and like high boots and his actual hair. And this is another thing that most people don't get. Really devout Jews don't show, even men don't show their hair. So he was not supposed to show it. He had his own hair just falling down to his back of his neck, and he was very much not devout in the sense of dressing, but he was still very much devout in the fact that he actually went and prayed, and like 4 times a day. It's very interesting. But basically, the rabbi looks him in the face and is like, "I know you," and then he turns around and walks away because he doesn't want to interact with him because he is not obeying all the rules of the religion. And so you have this weird little schism. And what really ends the sort of culture of freeness is the fact that the Russians take over, and they're notorious, and the Russian government was really, really notorious for being kind of anti-Semitic for most of its history up until like 1917 when it was, collapsed and replaced with the Soviet government. And it's really quite interesting to read about because you sort of think about it and you're like, it's a very multicultural sort of country, and what you learned at least in that period was, And what she realized is that what was ultimately destroyed by first the Russians and then the Nazis was very, very interesting and really can't be researched except in books, and it's actually pretty sad. And so I really like to think about what you can learn from an interesting sort of state like the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which is what was called after it merged with Lithuania in 1564, I think it was. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Don't know where I'm going with that.